So good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be here. I keep complaining every year to Maria that it's really unfair to put such a competition against us in that morning session with such a stunning view. Between the view and the nice dinner yesterday, it's obviously very tough, for us to get your attention, so I will do my best. Congratulations for your resilience. I guess some of you were up very late yesterday, and I'm not just talking about Maria, who was practicing her dancing moves, I guess, until very late. Before I do start with my presentation, maybe a quick question to you, a practical question. How do you recognize a French speaker on a Swedish conference? And I'm not just talking about the accent. It's the only one wearing a tie. I did it on purpose, obviously, so that you would recognize me. By the way, I was trying really hard to write Bostadt here. I've been trying to look for that accent on my keyboard, but I never found it, so I just had to write Bastard. Sorry about this. Anyway, so as Maria said, we have not so much time and a lot to say, so we'll go rather quickly. First of all, a bit of introduction. That's a self-promotion moment of the presentation. I will go quick. I guess all of you are familiar with trade associations. Energigas is one. So we're pretty much doing the same thing at European level for the LPG sector. We're based in Brussels. That's our core mission, to represent the interest of the LPG industry towards everything that can affect it, either EU legislation or technical regulations, ADR, SEN standards, and so on. We're very proud to have 17 associations as members, including Energigas, which is by far the best. And I'm not just saying that because I'm Sweden right now, obviously. We also have a number of LPG distributing companies, some of them being present in Scandinavia. So we have, for instance, the mother companies of companies that will certainly be familiar to you in Scandinavia, like Flowgas, Primagaz, and Cosan. So we have their mother companies as members, so SHV Energy, UGI, and DCC Energy. Right, before I get into the core matter of my presentation this morning, which is what we do as an association and the kind of challenges and opportunities that we see upcoming in the next couple of years, I wanted to give you a quick background about the LPG industry, because sad but true, I suspect most of you are not from the LPG industry, but are probably more on the natural gas side of things. Something which is very, I would say almost unique with LPG industry is that it's very versatile and can be put to use in many different segments. And it really distinguishes us in a way. So that's why I really wanted to make sure that you would keep that in mind, that it can be put in so many different segments. So we have right now close to 38 million tons of LPG consumed in Europe. Big chunk of it going to the petrochemical industry, but it's not really the most interesting to us. That's just cracking the molecule to turn it into some other things. Well, a lot more interested about these segments. Obviously, specifically in Sweden, the industrial segment is by far the most important to you guys, because the other segment like autogas, the use of LPG for transport and residential, so heating and cooking is not so common in Sweden, a lot stronger in other countries. Congratulations, Sweden. Sweden is actually the third largest market that we have in the industrial segment in Europe, with, if I remember well, somewhere over 300,000 tons distributed every year. Right, so let's get into EU policy stuff, and that's my favorite. I'm a lobbyist by training, so that's the topic that gets me turned on really easily. I would start with bad news. We're in a very challenging environment, but I guess you know that as energy carriers, predominantly fossil, especially for LPG, but to some extent also true for natural gas. The EU has set a number of really ambitious targets. So 3 of them, they are very cleverly called 20-20-20 to be achieved by, yes, 2020. The EU is on track to meet the 3 of them, more or less, on CO2 cutting, CO2 emissions cutting, energy efficiency increasing, and renewable energy growing. Recently, there was the new series of 2030 targets that were agreed among the member states, so setting the scene for our industry, I mean the gas industry in general, for the next 10 years. And as you can see, it's going more and more ambitious, putting pressure on our industries to actually deliver against all these three targets. But the best is yet to come. More recently, the Commission issued a non-legislative proposal, but a strategic plan setting indicative targets for 2050 into what they call the long-term decarbonization strategy. And yes, clearly, there is an EU ambition to go fully carbon neutral by 2050. Obviously putting a lot of pressure on our industries, that's a fact. But we're very confident about the future, and we think our industry is ready to take up some of these challenges, and I will explain why now. Starting with the obvious, gas does bring immediate benefits, both in terms of cutting CO2 and pollutant emissions. It sounds stupid, but it's not so obvious. You have plenty of energies out there, some of them being heavily promoted by either national governments or EU institutions, that do require trade-offs. They may save on CO2, but they are not so good on pollutant emissions, or vice versa. Things like diesel in transport has been heavily supported by governments to cut their CO2 emissions for decades. And since the Dieselgate, we know the result that you can get with diesel when it comes to NOx emissions, for instance. The same story with biomass, somewhat. Biomass in heating sounds like a very good idea, very cheap way for the member states to meet their CO2 targets, because let's face it, it's the cheapest renewable type of energy available in Europe, especially in Scandinavia. But when you burn biomass, you get an awful lot of particulate matters. So you cannot win on all fronts. Gas does provide that. Short-term, immediate benefits on all fronts. Even when our molecule is from a fossil origin, and again, that's relevant for both LPG and natural gas, we can bring a lot of benefits depending on the way we use that molecule. And again, even fossil LPG, which is coming from either natural gas extraction or oil refining, if you put it in the best possible appliances, you get fantastic results. Because very often, especially in a place like Brussels, you have this really, really deep idea that the energy world is based on a clear-cut dichotomy between renewables and fossil. To some extent it was, for a long time. But now you have a lot of possibilities to put to the best possible use even fossil energies into appliances that happen to be considered by legislation as a renewable installation. So I'm giving a few examples here. So for instance, gas heat pumps. You can put fossil gas in a gas heat pump, but the heat that you will get out of it is actually renewable because of the appliance itself. So you have a lot of modular use of energy. So it's a key message that we're trying to push to policymakers. Stop thinking that fossil fuel are no good. If you put them to good use in the best possible renewable type of installations, you get some fantastic results. So I was giving some other examples. I mean, combined heat and power, for instance. That's another very interesting way to use energy. Thermosolar heating. Range extenders, something which is becoming really popular on trucks and cars, so that you no longer have to rely entirely on batteries to fuel an electric vehicle. You can actually produce the electricity on site, on the car itself, using clean burning fuels like LPG or natural gas, for instance. Last but not least, something very important to your industry, and something which is still very new, I would say. We are newer in that area than natural gas. I mean, natural gas has a lot more experience with biomethane and biogas than we have on the LPG side. In the last couple of years, our companies have started distributing renewable LPG on the European market. That's a bit of a revolution for us because it's relatively new, but that's a game changer. Because again, if you combine these, let's say, immediate benefits with the longer term prospect of our industry being able to carry its own energy transition, well, then we have a credible story to tell policymakers. Because we keep referring into our session as LPG, as a no-regret option. There is no locking in. Even if you keep promoting LPG, be it in transport, in heating, in industry, there is no lock-in, because as long as you have good, efficient appliances, bio-LPG is a pure blending fuel. There is no impact whatsoever on the appliance. Whether you put 1% bio-LPG into your mix or 100%, the appliance will run the exact same way. There is no corrosion issue. You don't need separate storage sites or distribution sites. It's so easy. So in the longer term, we obviously want as an industry to increase that bio-LPG proportion, hence making it possible for us to reach the very long-term targets. Here is just a screenshot from a document we just published, which is precisely, telling this long-term prospect for LPG, helping the EU achieve its targets. These are the four things I wanted to focus on for the rest of my presentation in terms of what kind of challenges our industry, but natural gas industry will face as well in the coming year or two. So I'm basically trying to justify my salary here. That's what I keep telling to our members. These are the big things that are down the pipeline for us. Let me go through them. 2019 is a very special year for Europe in general. It's the year of EPN Elections. I won't bore you with the details. I guess you read the press, so you know exactly what is at stake now. So for any European association, it's obviously a very critical moment where you want to leverage your visibility. You want to make sure that you have friends and partners in the next parliament. Something that we've tried doing this time, I've been a lobbyist in Brussels for quite a while, so I've done quite a few EPN elections. Something that we've tried in the election for the first time, we wanted to reach out to MEPs, actually even before they would get elected. So we had this idea of developing several types of material and messaging so that we can reach them out during the campaign period. So we have developed these documents, which is some sort of manifesto for our industry to try and position ourselves as a knowledge partner to the wannabe MEPs, those that are running, that may be elected soon. We've developed a dedicated website, and we've had for the last several weeks a rather intense social media campaign. So reaching out to these candidates, not just telling them LPG is great, they should know that already, but no, a lot more talking about, okay, you're going to be an MEP, so be aware that you have a lot of challenges ahead of you. Climate change, air pollution, energy efficiency, push for renewables, we are here to help. By the way, did you think of, and then we give them a few suggestions of things that they may want to introduce when they will be in the parliament in terms of new legislation or amendments to existing legislation. So it's something which is running right now, something down the pipeline, which will be the last phase of our outreach. We will invite all our members, so including obviously Energiga, so I hope Maria can participate, down in Brussels to meet with the respective MEPs, so that again, these people can, from the very first day, put LPG on the map and remember us as a potential partner. Bio-LPG, I mentioned it already. There is a lot going on for us, especially because I mentioned it's a relatively new product for us. So the legislative framework is still to be shaped in a way. So we have bio-LPG already on the EU radar screen, in the sense that in the last revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, which was done about 2 years ago, introduced last year. So we have several processes, production processes for bio-LPG, which are referenced in the so-called Annex 3 of the directive, listing all kinds of renewable fuels that are de facto in the scope of the directive. So we are there. But some pieces are still missing. Another very important piece for us is that bio-LPG is included in the definition, the latest definition that are in these directives, which are, the definition itself is relatively large. So biogas in the Renewable Energy Directive is defined as gaseous fuels produced from biomass. So it's relatively wide, and it obviously does include products like bio-LPG. So it's something that we fought for when the directive was being revised, and that really happy to achieve. While in the past, it would more specifically refer to just natural gas, because that was the most common type of biogas on the market. Bio-LPG is also explicitly included in the list of fuels to be supported by the mandatory target for renewables in transport. One thing that we are working on right now with the Commission is to potentially try and have some, and again, sorry about the technical terms, but default values. It's something else which is listed in one of the annexes, Annex 5 of the directive, which basically is an average calculation of the GHG footprint for the production of various types of renewable fuels. Right now, bio-LPG is not in there because at the time of the preparation of the directive, we didn't have enough information from the producers of bio-LPG to actually feed the Commission with very detailed data sets. It's something that we're working on now. Why are we doing this? I mean, beyond ticking that box, the default values makes it a lot more cost efficient for the producers and the distributors to actually move around the product. Without the default values, it means that every batch of bio-LPG getting out of the production plant has to be certified. And obviously, it costs a lot of money. When you have those default values, you can just apply this average value depending on the kind of feedstocks you use, and then it's a lot easier to trade. You can basically ship it to a different country, and it doesn't need to be recertified at the point of use. So that will make the life of our companies easier. We're also working on another very interesting project, trying to list all the possible plants, production sites in Europe that could deliver these bio-LPG volumes. Right now, we have about 150,000 tons of bio-LPG on the European market. If you remember well, I mentioned 37 million tons consumed in Europe of conventional LPG. So it's a very, very tiny part. But in just the next couple of years, we expect this production to increase by another 100,000. And we've done projections over the longer term, and we think there is a lot of potential. Most of the volumes come for now from the production of biodiesel from HVO. But even with the progress of HVO in the future, we don't expect this source to be more than 10% of our total bio-LPG volumes in the longer term, down to 2050. There is a lot more potential with cellulosics, so gasification of biomass. There is an abundant feedstock. It's readily available. There is big competition with other fuels, that's a fact. But we think that if the market conditions and the regulatory framework actually do align, there is a lot of potential for these volumes to come. So we're trying to map out all the plants that may be interested in getting bio-LPG out of their cellulosic production plants. Sorry about that. I'm using the taboo word. Taxation. We all love it, right? I have bad news. There is most probably a revision of the energy taxation directive in the pipeline. And right now, the current framework is very favorable towards gas, especially in transport. So both CNG and LPG are given very favorable treatment. That may change big time in the next proposal. So piece of advice and recommendation for the entire industry, we need to work together really hard. Because the last time the Commission tried to revise this directive, it was almost instantly killing both CNG, LNG, and LPG in transport because the minimum rates would increase so high. So I think we have a nice challenge ahead of us. Something that we're trying to push really strong is to stop the Commission thinking that energy should be taxed depending on their energy density, because otherwise it means that all fuels are treated the same, and then the CO2 emissions are not really taken into account. So it's something that we are trying to push on. Last but not least, I mentioned air quality. That's a very important argument for gas in general, because that's where we deliver the best results. Something else which is in the pipeline, revision of the so-called ambient air quality directives. Why are they good to us? Precisely because they create problems to other competing fuels, which are highly polluting. So things like biomass or oil, for instance, or even coal, which are very much used in Europe, they will have a hard time. Especially because now the member states have new obligations on air quality. They are mandated to have regular air quality action plans, and also from something called the regulation on the EU Energy Union governance. The member states, they have to do impact assessment systematically of the air quality consequences of their climate change policies. So the whole idea that member states can tick the box cheaply by pushing biomass to the market and then reaching their renewable energy targets so easily, that's over. Because it comes with so much air pollution problems that they will need to balance things out and then to look at other solutions, hence opening a nice window of opportunity for gas, as we think, both fossil and renewable. A key ask that we have here, and slightly embarrassing for the EU, but right now the requirements, the maximum ceilings of air pollution that we have in Europe are actually a lot higher than the ones pushed by the World Health Organization, which in principle, represent both the developing and the developed worlds. Something that we're pushing down the throat of the Commission, they have to get better, especially because the current requirements, which are relatively loose right now, we have almost half of the member states breaching them already. So if the EU is really serious about trying to saving lives from air pollution, that's the way to go. So it's another key message that we're pushing and that we think the natural gas industry should be pushing with us. So on these words, that's my conclusion. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I don't know if we have time now, but in any case, if you found my presentation interesting, you have burning questions. Unfortunately, I will have to run straight away after this panel to the train station to catch my plane in Copenhagen. But you know where to find me. My email address is here, so feel free to send me your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And as you see, we are now two French here on the...
Very good. I feel less lonely now.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Very interesting. One question. In the future, when you look at the different market segments that you have here, do you see that any one of them will disappear or decline, or will there come any new market segments, do you believe?
Yeah. Well, to some extent, the tendency that we see on our markets are not really different to the one that you see on natural gas. We are very much struggling on the residential sector, and not necessarily because we are being, challenged by other competing fuels, but energy efficiency. It's all over the place. You see the same thing with natural gas in most of our markets, where LPG residential segment declines, natural gas declines as well. For us, we've had a very nice success story in the transport segment, actually. So a bit like natural gas, it was starting relatively low some years ago, but we've been consistently increasing our market share on the autogas front, so LPG for transport in Europe. So by somewhere between 4 and 7% every year for the last 10 and 15 years, and that keeps going. So right now we have about 15 million LPG vehicles in Europe, fueled by 45,000 LPG stations. So all the conditions are in place and we see this segment growing. Industrial is also incrementally increasing every year, but it tends to stagnate over time. So that's effectively a fact. So we are hoping that by introducing more bio-LPG into that segment, we can accelerate its growth by potentially switching industrial plants running on heating oil right now or gas oil